Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our October Florida Broker Roundtable with Robert Milligan. Before we begin, I want to say how happy we are to now offer a ton of great free marketing tools to all of our agents. These are now available in the AJI University. Our goal is always to give back to our agents by offering the newest tools and technology to you. None of this would be possible without you and your amazing amount of agent referrals to AJI. As Allison James continues to grow with agents referring other agents to our brokerage, we will be able to provide more of these tools to you. Remember, you can earn a monthly or yearly residual payment simply by having an agent join us. All you need to do is contact Jeff Jabora or Alicia Aratari in our National Growth and Development Department and provide them with the contact information of the agent who you would like to refer over. I would now like to introduce Robert Milligan. Good morning, Robert.
Good morning. Thank you, Sheena, and thank you everybody for tuning in and checking out our webinar here today. Today we're going to go over a few things. It's going to primarily, we're going to go over multiple offer process, still a seller's market, and we're still seeing a lot of multiple offers. We are going to talk about how to calculate your effective date and the time period calculation that's always derived from the effective date. And we're going to talk about a recent case, an example that we had in-house where a customer was trying to cancel a contract and contractually they didn't really have a right to keep their escrow deposit that the buyer had placed, but they were still trying to get out of the contract and get that deposit. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And we will also talk about a wire fraud scheme that I've been seeing. So sometimes we talk about kind of business building stuff, how to get listings, stuff like that. This is going to be a little bit more nuts and bolts, how to operate your business and best practices surrounding the topics that I just covered. So first we will talk about the multiple offer process, because this is something that newer agents ask me about a lot, and sometimes even experienced agents that don't take a lot of listings and they haven't been personally responsible to facilitate multiple offers. So what happens with the multiple offer process that is a realtor code of ethics issue is that if there are multiple offers and you're the listing agent, you must make all the interested parties aware that it's a multiple offer situation. So that's a code of ethics rule, and you cannot have more than one offer on a property and not make the other one of the parties aware and just call them up and say, sorry, we decided we're going to accept a different offer, and then then they say, well, wait a second, we didn't even know there was another offer. So you do have to make everybody aware that it's a multiple offer situation. So I have a practice that I enjoy best that is very open and communicative. It reduces the probability of there being any problems, any lawsuits, any realtors or buyers, customers feeling like they didn't have a fair process. So my preferred method we'll go over first, and then I will tell you the alternative, because it doesn't have to go this way, but this is the way that we do it 99% of the time, and it helps us not have any trouble. So when we have multiple offers, we usually, of course, notify all the parties that it's now a multiple offer situation, and we usually set a deadline that's about 3 days out, depending on the time of the week that it is, and let everybody know that we are going to accept your highest and your best offer up until such and such day, 5 p.m., usually about 3 days out, to give everybody a chance to submit their highest and best. So everybody's aware, everybody's been notified, it's multiple offers. Everybody gets their highest and best offer back to us within that 3-day time frame. And then after that time period has expired, we do not accept any more offers, and we sit down with the seller usually pretty quickly after. I mean, if I set the deadline for 5 p.m., I'd encourage you to sit down with them that evening and then choose one. You can't choose to counter 3 offers, because if they all accept and say yes to your counter, then you only have one house to sell. Potentially you'd have 3 effective contracts, which would create giant liability for the seller. So you can only choose one of those offers, and then you counter that offer, and you let the other 2 offers know that thank you so much for your interest. We've chosen to counter another offer at this time. If by chance we're not able to reach an agreement with the offer that we've countered, we'll let you know as quickly as possible, and see if you still have any interest. So that's basically my preferred method of handling multiple offers, so that you're open, everybody feels like they've had a fair process, the other customers that are working with other realtors, they feel like they've been given a fair process, and it really flows harmoniously. I've never really had any problem whenever we followed that method. Now the contingency factor there is that you don't have to do it this way, and the seller can choose to just accept an offer and not actually give anybody that due process. So you do still have to make everybody aware that it's a multiple offer situation, but you do not necessarily have to give them a deadline or a chance to get in their highest and best offer. If the seller who you have your fiduciary obligation to, if you're the listing agent, instructs you that, I don't want to counter anybody else, I don't want to see any other offers, I like this buyer for whatever reason, maybe they submitted, one of those letters with their story why they want the house, maybe the seller just likes that buyer and just says, I don't want to see anything from anybody else, I just want to accept this offer. The seller can direct you to do that, and obviously you're going to have some problems with the other realtors and the other customers who are not going to understand it. They're going to feel like something was mishandled and they weren't given a fair chance, but it is technically legal for you to do that. So I discourage that, but it can happen. So, and it has happened a few times over the years. So something to be aware of, but I recommend, giving a very systematic process so that everybody feels like they've had a fair chance. And usually if your seller's intention is to get the highest possible proceeds on the sale, my preferred method, the method we went over first, will generally get the seller the best possible price. So that's the multiple offer process, and after the webinar, if there's questions or any time for that matter, you're welcome to give me a call when you have a situation and you need some help with your multiple offers. So next I wanted to talk a bit about the effective date and the time period calculation, because sometimes whenever our dates are calculated improperly, there are very significant legal ramifications if we've miscalculated the date. So that's something that comes up, something that's very, very important. So I think the first and foremost principle of calculating the effective date is that whatever day that the contract is signed and initialed by everybody, and even if there's missing an initial and you go back, say we signed a contract today and the buyer or seller missed an initial on the last page and they don't make that initial until tomorrow, that's still not going to basically, if they don't, the effective date will be calculated the following day if they missed that initial until tomorrow. So an example of that, say we signed a contract today, which is the 3rd, as it turns out, of October. And so if today's the effective date, the first day, say you have a 10-day inspection period, the first day of that 10 days is actually going to be tomorrow. So, the 4th would be the first day. So we'll calculate, on through, and then midnight of the 10th day is whenever your inspection period is going to expire if it's a 10-day inspection period. So, and then again, if an initial was missed until tomorrow, that would technically make the 4th day of the month is going to be your effective date, and it's going to push back that 10-day period one day. So if there's any questions about that, let me know, but that's a really important concept. And, we can talk about proper ways to make sure that your customers are covered with, whenever, if they have to give notice before the inspection contingency is finished or not. But it is important to be aware and know how to calculate your effective dates properly, because, if you miss that deadline on your inspection contingency or finance contingency, if you miss it by, 5 minutes, if it expires in some cases at 5 p.m. or, at midnight, if you don't get your notice out prior to when you have to, it can be the difference between your customer, keeping or losing an escrow deposit, depending on what side of the transaction that you're on. So if you have any questions about that, let me know. Wanted to talk real quick. We've seen some examples are getting more and more rampant with wire fraud. I think this is something to start coaching our customers about a little bit better, where people are able to hack email accounts and they identify somebody as a person who's going to be conducting a real estate transaction, and then they wait for the proper timing in that transaction and try to usurp the title company's email with wiring instructions. So whenever the buyer is making their wire to purchase the property, the buyer is given from the party that's committing the fraud, the buyer is giving erroneous wire instructions, making it as if it's coming from the title company, and then the buyer sends the money to the party committing the scheme. So that's something to be aware of. Most title companies now have secured methods of sending their wire instruction, and they follow up with a phone call to verify that the wiring information is, they'll have the customer read it to them to make sure that it's the same info. I've seen some kind of lackadaisical title companies that are not being so thorough with this, and it's still causing problems. So I think it's, just a testament to how important it is to work with a title company or an attorney is my preference, a law firm that's reputable and that's going to go through these extra steps to make sure that they're preventing wire fraud, because it creates a lot of weird problems for your customers if for instance, the seller is obviously moving, they're buying another property, they need the money, and the buyer, effectively performed and sent the money, but the seller didn't receive it, and then it could take easily 2, 3, 4, 6 weeks for the whole fraud situation to get sorted out. So, it's just a really crummy situation that's easily preventable, and I think that the best practice to avoid this is, we don't need to get too terribly involved in this, but make sure that you're using a title company who really goes the extra mile to facilitate all the processes, and not the least of which is this one. So keep an eye out for wire fraud. If you're working with the buyer, coach them to make sure that they double check where they're wiring their money to before they actually send the wire. Last but not least, another story here for you, something that's occurred kind of recently, is what we do, what happens whenever we're on the listing side of a transaction and the seller decides that he wants to keep an escrow deposit even though he or she is contractually not obligated to do so. Or I'm sorry, not authorized to do so is the better word, not obligated, but authorized. So what happens, we've got hypothetically a customer, we're representing them on a sale, a purchaser comes along from another brokerage and they put the property under contract. They canceled the contract well within their inspection period, which gives them every legal right, contractually speaking, to request a reimbursement of their escrow deposit and cancel the contract. So what happens whenever the seller decides that, I don't want to give this buyer their money back, I just don't think they deserve it, and I just don't want to, even though the contract says plain as day that the buyer is entitled to get that back? Well, what happens basically is the seller is entitled to do that. The seller is entitled to make a claim on that escrow deposit. The seller is not required to sign a release and cancellation. And I mean, my recommendation would be to strongly encourage and urge your seller that, we just want to facilitate this process. The sooner that we can put this behind us and get the property back on the market and not have this cloud on title, the better that it's going to end up being for everybody. But just so you know, technically speaking, the seller can make this claim. The seller can decide to not submit the release and cancellation, not sign it, create an escrow dispute, and go have a hearing, go have a mediation about it. And in the meantime, you can actually market the property as an active property in most MLSs. There might be some of your boards, because we're members of so many, that might have different rules or bylaws about that. But generally speaking, you can market the property as an active listing, even though there's a escrow dispute that is remaining to be settled. So it does get a little bit sticky in most title companies and attorneys if, for instance, another buyer comes along. They have their ways of making the next purchase subject to the settlement of this escrow dispute. It does not necessarily need to be settled, but just so you know, that's something that can happen. But, as always, my recommendation is to try to facilitate the process as much as you can and try to explain to your customers that, a escrow dispute is going to be absolutely futile if, it's in very clear black and white what to happen under certain situations, according to the contract. So those are some of the things that we've seen recently, some of the things that I just wanted to share with you and talk with you about. And of course, if you have anything situational or any questions about what we've just, just discussed here, happy to do so. And with that, Sheena, I'm turning it back over to you.
Thank you, Robert. And thank you, everyone, so much for joining us. We would like to give a huge thank you to Robert Milligan for another great broker roundtable, and to everyone who joined us today. And we'll see you next month. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.